Good morning, everyone. This is Saurabh, and I am your trainer for performance testing, and I am on behalf of Uplatz. So, coming to my last session, I was discussing about PTLC, which is nothing, which is when we accredit the full name of that PTLC, it's Performance Testing Life Cycle. So we'll be discussing all the process of PTLC life cycle, and we will go in depth of that particular life cycle, PTLC life cycle. So as I have already discussed in the previous class, you might have got the basic idea like what all components it is involved in PTLC life cycle. So let me just open that particular image what I have discussed. So first comes risk assessment, then an FR gathering, test planning, test scripting, test run and analysis, and reporting. So let us discuss this risk assessment process and know what all things is is more involved in risk and what components we need to avoid and what components we need to do the performance testing. So this will be our today's agenda, and even I will share a demo document which was downloaded from a site, and let me just I'll just refer that particular test of a risk assessment document as well, and we'll know overall process. So if you haven't seen the previous session, I'll highly suggest you guys to go and first check that out, and if you face any kind of doubts or anything, then please let me know, or you can even reach me. So without wasting much time, let's get started. So what do you understand by risk assessment, and what actually risk assessment process is? So under this life cycle process, performance testing start with risk assessment. Performance testing starts with risk assessment. Sorry, I'll just mention my first topic as risk assessment. So let us note what all things we need to do in risk assessment process. So basically, this is the first starting phase of of the PTLC life cycle, and they start with risk assessment process. So we can just name first process involved in PTLC life cycle. Okay, so performance testing starts with PT starts with risk assessment. And what do you mean by risk assessment? So risk assessment determines the neediness of performance testing for each individual component. Why is risk assessment needed? The main purpose is to determine the neediness of performance, testing for each individual component in the software system. Okay, the main purpose is to find what all components we need to test and what all risk does it have. So basically, uh, every risk assessment can be identified with some risk score. So we have to calculate that particular risk score, and it helps us to find out the criticality of the component. So for identifying identifying the risk assessment, we need to calculate the risk score. So for identifying the risk assessment, we need to calculate the risk score. Based on the risk score, we identify the criticality of the component. So based on the risk score, we'll identify the criticality of the component. Whether what all component, like suppose there are five components, and we need to identify in the five components what all components need to be performed with uh, performance testing. So based on the risk score, we identify, suppose 3 and 4 needs to be undergone with performance testing process. So ET, risk assessment, helps performance tester to prioritize the testing. So based on the risk score, we choose the component, and it also helps the performance tester what all components we need to prioritize it. So based on the risk score, with the help of risk score, the performance tester can decide the required scope and scenario. So with the help of risk score, a performance tester can decide the required scope and scenario. So it also, like some of the testers, like also Like some of the performance tester uh, can utilize the particular phase to identify the critical business flow. If a performance tester decides any critical business flow and he calculate any of the risk for that particular component, and suppose I'll just give you a scenario in which like a performance tester is not undergoing with this risk assessment process. So what happens if he don't perform this activity and he don't decide the right component to do the performance testing? If suppose in production, if any of the failures come, then it will be high risk for you as you haven't conducted any of the risk assessment process for that particular component, and it will create a huge business loss for that particular the for the business. So it is highly important to identify the critical business functionality or the core business flows that is highly impacted to the business in terms of user experience, company revenue, long period application outage, etc. Okay, now let us know what is the purpose of this particular risk assessment. So risk assessment is conducted to decide the scope of performance testing in a project. So we identify what all scope is needs to be included and what all scope needs to be excluded, like critical business component which highly impact to the business needs to be needs to perform with performance testing. So we do a we do a calculation of risk score, and based on that particular risk score, we decide what components are highly impacted to the business and what is not impacted to the business. So what we can do, we can keep all those steps and we can avoid the things which is not highly impacted to the business. So it also helps us to understand the impact of changes on the existing functionality. Also the impact of adding new functionality to the existing system. Like it also help us to perform a in scope and out scope of component for performance testing. Based on the risk score, a PT performance tester based on the risk score, a performance tester choose the impacted critical functionality. Based on the risk score, a performance tester choose the impacted critical business functionality. High impact on the business. A PT performance tester needs to perform the rightful action and choose the right critical component for the risk assessment process. It helps to understand the impact of change on the existing functionality. Also, the impact of adding new functionality to the existing system. The impact of adding existing one. So a performance can in scope or outscope the components based on the risk score. Okay, now comes to like normally who does this particular process? There will be a lot of members or team members involved in this particular PTLC, but not everyone does this particular thing. As suppose you are a fresher, then you don't need to worry, as you don't need to do this particular perform of this activity, and this is a highly critical thing, and they won't align or give you this particular thing to do, as this involve highly critical business to identify the highly critical business flow. So for your safe side, I am making you explain this particular concept, as I don't think in any other videos you could particularly find this much in-depth tutorial who can explain you about overall process and everything. So my agenda in this course is to make you understand from start to end. So normally, this has been performed by a performance test manager, but still, I'll try to. I have downloaded a document in that we can refer what all things is there and what we need to keep and what is the critical business component is involved. So basically, this is performed by a performance test manager, and they identify the risk and then they distribute the work to everyone. So, what is the approach if they give you, suppose they have handed you this particular things and you need to perform and know what all critical business component you need to identify, then what all approaches you need to follow. Let's see. So first of all, get all the details of new functionality. And as I have given you and said you what's the purpose, impacted of changes on the existing. And you need to also discuss the change in the load slash volume.